Welcome back to the Burnout Club. This is the place where we explore and dissect burnout, one expert and experiment at a time. I'm your host, Patrice Bonfilio, and today I'm joined by Neal Mann. Thank you for being here, Neal.
Thanks a lot for having me on. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, and the audience should know I reached out to you because you are the co-founder of the company called Noan, because I wanted to use your software, not just because I wanted you on the podcast. So why don't you dive in? Tell us a little bit about you and your company.
Yeah, so I'm one of the co-founders of Noan. It's funny because we're actually trying to build a product that stops burnout across a lot of different categories for entrepreneurs. So Noan is ultimately it's the best business partner any entrepreneur could want. It's all powered by AI, enables them to develop all of their business strategy, create all their assets. And what we're really trying to do is automate all aspects of your company so that you don't get burnt out. Because in many ways, if you look at what people are doing now, things have changed from say 20, 30 years ago, where if you were building a small business, you create a product, you'd market it, it would be a number of channels, only one or two, maybe potentially. Now, every single business, it doesn't matter if you are, I was just talking to a psychologist, for example, or a surf coach or an e-com business, everything is digital. Yeah. And it's likely that you're now managing vast number of channels, distribution, decisions. We want to simplify that and give you AI alongside you to enable you to kind of automate the entire process. So that's what I do now, and I've had a bit of a journey to get here. I originally started in journalism, was my first career choice, and I was born in the UK, brought up in the UK, lived just outside London originally, and then went through my teens, didn't know quite what to do with my life, and ended up actually kind of not having the best time at 18 as a teenager, because I'd been playing a lot of sport and I was playing at one of the big rugby schools in the UK, and I thought that would be a career path. Got injured, kind of typical kind of athlete story, needed to make a decision what to do, and decided at the time to go into archaeology. And one of the things you're going to find is that I've had a bit of a winding journey to get to where I am. Did an archaeology degree, and then at the same time I was doing a lot of rock climbing, and somebody said to me, well, you shoot rock climbing films, why don't you go be a broadcast journalist? And that was my kind of next step. And then since then I've spent 20
years.
Of
steps.
20 years working my way to become an entrepreneur. And so that's kind of the origins, and now really focused on trying to enable anyone to be able to grow their own business, because nobody should have a barrier. I think, and there's a lot of barriers out there for people trying to be entrepreneurial. There's support barriers, finance barriers. We want to take that all away and make it a kind of level playing field for anybody to grow their business.
I'll say the best careers start with rugby injuries. I had one too. I'm playing in college. So you're in good company. Yeah.
What position did you play?
I was a winger.
Oh, same actually, yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, nice. Yeah. Okay. So maybe we'll arrange a old people match at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love the goal of what you're trying to do, because it is bringing across all the industries. Because think about me, right? I am a podcast host. I was trying to look for a solution to deal with the business of having a podcast and creating community, things like that. So it really did help me try to navigate in an efficient way using AI for business, because I had Lori Mazer on, and she's like a powerhouse in AI. And she really inspired me to actually just get my feet wet, play around with the GPTs and understand how it can help me and how to use it. And then I was kind of tired of writing 3-paragraph prompts for every single question that I had. So Noan has been quite helpful.
One of the things from our perspective is that what a lot of people don't realize, and what I've learned over the last 20 years of my career, is that a new approach to business is needed with AI. It's the first time ever that we're seeing a level set in how a business is structured, how it operates. And so that's really what we're trying to take on. And, I think one of the things I've seen over the last kind of 2 decades is I've worked with some of the biggest media companies, the biggest tech companies, and they all organically develop around knowledge, and they end up with like thousands of disconnected documents, disconnected types of strategy. I mean, you've worked at big organizations. We've all seen it. Someone over there thinks they're doing one thing. Somebody over there thinks they're doing something else. The issue with
Mm-hmm.
AI is that there's no single source of truth for it to understand what decision it wants to be making. And so we're focused on kind of level setting and saying, if you start from the ground up with an entrepreneur, it's the perfect place to do that because they can rebuild their business with AI at the center. How do they do that in a way that enables them to kind of always have accurate answers, be able to rely on AI assistants and agents based on that single source of truth? And one of the reasons we called our company Noan is because it's all based around knowledge and
Mm-hmm.
having a single source of business knowledge that the AI can reference. So yeah, that's the genesis of the company. And I think to hear exactly what you described, lots of people, there's two use cases right now. They're
Mm-hmm.
talking to AI, giving it lots of long prompts, trying to get the output it needs. And in some ways, that's helping efficiencies, but in many
Mm-hmm.
others, it's actually not making it easier. And there's a
Yeah.
great opportunity for the application layer to kind of step in and solve some of those problems, which is where we want to fit for entrepreneurs.
Yeah. The other reason I thought it would be interesting talking to you on this podcast is because you have such a catalog of burnout experiences from the different chapters of your career. So, broadcast journalism, even adding in, you're a dad to young kids while being an entrepreneur. So how have you sustained success at each chapter? Because this podcast is about talking to real people that are doing an admirable job in their careers and their lives and like getting real advice and real stories, not just what the doctor might say about burnout. So like, how did you sustain success?
Yeah, Catalog of Burnout is that's probably the title to my autobiography, I reckon. That might be it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I went from, obviously, like I mentioned, I went from archaeology in the early days into journalism,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a fundamental shift. And I worked at Sky News in the UK, which is one of the world's biggest 24-hour news channels, and it's
Yeah.
the fastest. It's probably, I think every journalist who comes through would say it's the most brutal environment to work in. It's
Mm.
incredible though. You're around amazing talent, everybody's top of their game. And I
Yeah.
originally did domestic news. I was a field producer, so I worked on the ground with correspondents and cameramen, and then on the news desk, on the foreign desk, and by the end, covered everything from
Mm-hmm.
domestic news in the UK all the way through to international news, the Arab Spring, the war in Libya.
Mm.
I went through that, and I think, if there's ever an industry where you get burnout, it's journalism.
Yeah.
And in particular, that type of journalism, 24-hour news,
Mm-hmm.
foreign work, and in war zone work is ultimate kind of burnout.
Right.
And yeah, it's about as crazy as a job gets, to be honest with you, because
And it doesn't stop.
it doesn't stop. And
Yeah.
it's not like you have, when you're on the ground on those stories, you don't have a huge amount of like support like you would if you were a
Mm.
part of like a large organization or a large scale organization in that environment. You're on your own as part of a very small team.
Mm-hmm.
And it's relentless.
Mm-hmm.
And I did, to be transparent, I burnt out of journalism. There's no doubt in my mind. I like
Yeah.
got to the point where I burnt out. And I think I've only sustained my career through luck in some ways, through like decisions that have been slightly lucky, but have then
Yeah.
been somewhat based around burnout because,
Mm-hmm.
when I look at journalism, I came around at a time when social media fundamentally changed news, and
Mm.
it became the first major sector to be completely disrupted by a new medium because it brought
Yeah.
users in from a different direction. It also was a completely different way we communicated with the world.
Mm-hmm.
The 5 p.m. broadcast or in 24-hour news, just the regular news channel, wasn't the only channel anymore. It was a
Yeah.
back and forth constantly. And I became known as one of the young journalists who was kind of really pushing that. And then through just a number of turn of events, I ended up getting approached to come work in the US and work at the Wall Street Journal and head
Mm-hmm.
up editorial innovation, which is what I ended up doing there. And that was very much like a bit of a lucky break because what it did was it took me out of the world I was in, which was just relentless, and gave me an opportunity to take a step back and actually be more strategic about what I was doing and bring my skills to a new type of journalism. And when I look back on it with the question of like, how have you avoided burnout or got through?
Yeah.
I think in some ways it was because I refocused what drove me. And I think when people have burnout or they're approaching burnout or they're trying to be successful, everyone's going to be running 100 miles an hour to try and do what they want.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think, when I look back at journalism, I was driven massively by the adrenaline. I'm like an adrenaline junkie. I'm about as close as you can get to a full scale adrenaline junkie, you know, whether it's climbing, surfing, like war zone work, it's just all out adrenaline.
Yeah.
And I actually realized that I could take that same drive and focus on a different thing, which was actually pushing myself to learn more and to expand my knowledge base and do new things. And
Yeah.
that actually helped me kind of transition out of the journalism world. And that was kind of the first step. And then I went, just to go through the catalog, and then we can come back to it. Then I went to work in corporate strategy at News Corp, which is one of the world's biggest publications, and the technical team there, and as part of the leadership team. And then from there, I went and set up a consulting division for a global agency called Anomaly, which is a brilliant creative agency. And that, again, is a world that is relentless, you know, absolutely relentless. Yes. And then now I'm a founder of a startup at 42 with 2 kids. So for anyone listening, that is basically my catalog of
it is relatable and brutal all at the same time. So do you think that the corporate relentlessness prepared you for toddlers?
No, nothing prepares you for toddlers. I think, you know, for me, when I look back on where I've been, you know, leaving journalism was I miss that job every day. I think everybody does. It doesn't get any better. It's the most addictive job you're ever going to do. But then obviously I got an opportunity to expand my knowledge base. And the thing that I learned at the time was that I needed to do things in my life that would enable me to sustain my own mental health. Because, you know, in journalism in particular, mental health is not a conversation. It's getting marginally better, but of all industries, I listened to a great podcast you had on PTSD. You know, in all industries, it's the one where there is nobody wants to talk about it. If you acknowledge that you have PTSD, which every foreign journalist does for the most part, you know, if everyone's honest about it, and even domestic ones, because they're dealing with like pretty horrific stuff a lot of the time. You know, in that world, nobody talks about it. And for me, what was interesting was that I shifted into a corporate environment, and I moved to America from Europe, where people are much more open about their mental health, which really helped me around like managing burnout and thinking and being open about it. And then at the same time, you know, I really lent into surfing and climbing as a way for me to have some focus time. And that sustained me for 10 years, I think. And if I'm transparent now, the hardest thing for me is that I'm realizing that, you know, I said to somebody the other day that I've realized that you have 3 things in your life. You have your family, your like passions that you want to do that give you that hit, right? And then you have your work life. I think you can only ever sustain 2 of those at once. And a good example is the last year of New York for me. I was living on the beach. I had 2 young kids, but my work was relatively easy because I've been doing it for a long time. I could kind of turn up and it didn't push me as much. And so as a result, I was just surfing all the time, and I was working with a world-class surf coach in New Zealand, and I got exceptionally good for me at like 39, 40, which I was not expecting. So my surfing was going, my family was going, work I didn't really have to focus on too much. As soon as I then moved to Europe again to found a startup, you know, my surfing's dropped and I'm not getting in as much. And I'm realizing that when it comes to burnout, that's leading me to burnout because I'm not actually getting that downtime to let everything reset because it's family, work, and I'm not getting that personal time to do it. And so that's the one thing I've started to realize is like, you've got to step back and think about those 3 things and where's the balance right now? And how do you ensure that you give yourself at least try and get an equal balance? And I don't think you'll always get an equal balance. And if I look at some people, they let their family go, or they let their work go, or but you've got to try and keep even balance between those 3.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you're naming surfing and rock climbing because I think I can identify, I don't do either of them, but I can identify with the concentration level that you need to actually do that activity. Because I found that I also needed to kind of like make it a bit smaller scale with things that rejuvenate me, right? To try, because it's just such a tenuous act to try to have any sort of balance. But, you know, it just wasn't working for a long time if I didn't lose myself and kind of go into a state of flow in that personal activity. It was like worthless. I, might as well either be working or doing something with my kids, unless it's actually going to recharge me like that.
That's
Yeah.
exactly right. And I think I'm a bit of an obsessive around time, and I read a lot of
Ah.
books on time and the physics of time. And one of the reasons
Hmm.
is exactly that, because if I look back at everything I've done in my life, everything is always focused on me trying to get as close as possible to the now. And
Hmm.
you cannot get close to the now if you're not in that flow state. And whether it's somebody
Hmm.
covering war, like you will never be closer to the now than when you're getting shelled, rocketed, and you're sat there and it's just happening. Like you are in as
Yeah.
close as you'll ever be to the now. And that's
Yeah.
the addiction. And at the same time with
Hmm.
surfing or climbing, or, my wife is an artist, an art teacher, for her
Mm.
now is actually doing her art. And then she's in the focus and the flow zone.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't matter what you're doing. I think trying to find that experience helps recharge you, takes you out of the moment, and enables you to then come back with often more clarity than constantly running and constantly just going and going and going and going. Because
Yeah.
a lot of people I've seen who do that and don't do those kind of things in their life, they're the ones who really do actually burn out.
Mm.
I think many people who manage to avoid it, which I'd say I kind of have to an
Hmm.
extent, is because they've got that in their life that gives them that escapism, um,
Hmm.
and gives them that focus on the moment and the now.
Yes. So when we've talked a lot about what you have done and those experiences. What are you excited about for the future? I think it always helps me thinking about what's coming, being optimistic. Do you think that way as well?
I do. Do you mean personally or just about the world? In my
Oh,
instance,
no, not,
those two things are probably not going to
yeah,
have the same answer.
no, no, more so for yourself or, your company or however you want to take it, but maybe not at a total macro level.
Um, yeah, for me, I think the most exciting thing is that we're trying to build a platform that solves a massive issue for other people. I want other people to have their time back. And I want other
Hmm.
people to not be the doctor, the farmer, the surf coach, whoever it is, to not
Hmm.
be overwhelmed, burnt out, not able to see their kids because they're out of balance in those three areas because they just have to be to keep their business running, right? Like,
Hmm.
and I think what excites me is actually seeing that start to come to fruition. I think
Hmm.
AI in particular is the greatest technology innovation that's ever been to enable that. I think it's
Hmm.
definitely like the one thing that's finally enabling it, and that was why we obviously founded Known. I do think it's going to have an impact in different ways on other in jobs across society. I think not many
Hmm.
people are prepared for that at all,
Yeah.
and I think that is going to be a vast issue for many people. I mean, for me, what's also exciting is that of our users, we've got a number who are dyslexic, who had barriers to
Oh, interesting.
entry to, building a business, right? Because if you are that coach and you've all of a sudden got to create lots of content and blog content and emails and
Hmm.
articles, there's barriers to entry. And I think we've actually got quite a few that I've spoken to. That to me is exciting because the barriers to
Yeah.
entry to running a company, to scaling a company is dropping
Hmm.
drastically.
Hmm.
And I find that incredibly exciting.
Yeah.
And I think, it just opens up such huge opportunities across society for people who typically would have
Hmm.
had a barrier to become an entrepreneur and to build a business. I mean, last
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, I because I wasn't surfing enough
Hmm.
over last year, and I live, just for anybody listening, I live in a world-class surf zone in Portugal, so I have some of the best waves in Europe on my doorstep, and I don't surf as much as I should, and it's largely because I've got two kids and I'm running a startup. But
Yeah.
I was sat there thinking, well, I need a way to get in and actually start to stimulate myself to get in.
Hmm.
So I thought, well, I'll build an app with AI, and I used a platform to build the app. It took me a day, built an app,
Whew.
built the website, uploaded
Nice.
it into Known, started running
Hmm.
the running it and launched it, and it got users within about 3 or 4 days, and other people are using it. I sent it to my friends and was like, I've just built this app because I needed to motivate myself as a 42-year-old to get surfing, and people started using it.
Yeah.
And to me, I
That's
think that,
great.
yeah, to me, that is what a lot of people don't realize is coming. And there's
Hmm.
massive downsides. Like, I would have needed a team. I would have needed probably $1 million to build what I built with an agency, etc. I didn't. I did it off my own back in a really
Hmm.
short period of time. And there's downsides to that. It has economic implications in some ways, but in others, the opportunity for people coming forward to build things,
Hmm.
and a great many people out there, like yourself, they might have had a background that wasn't particularly creative, but
Hmm.
from a work perspective, but they are
Yeah.
creative and they've never had that unlocked. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden, they've got the opportunity to go home at night and build something and then go, do you know what? I'm going to launch this and I'm going to take the leap and I'm going to get out there. And that to me is the
Hmm.
most exciting thing, I think.
That's fantastic. I never thought about that. So just the agency people now have to solve problems. You don't have to
Yeah.
wait for the mega corporations to hire divisions to think about how to build the app to solve that problem. That's we should have a whole separate episode on
Yeah. And you can
that.
just build it yourself. And I think,
Yeah.
that to me is what's so exciting. And then on top of that,
Hmm.
what's also really interesting, I can't write a line of code. But
Hmm.
I've worked with
Yeah.
engineers for the last 15 years, and
Hmm.
I've worked very closely and been part of technology teams, but I can't code. But what
Hmm.
I understand is systems and how things
Yeah.
connect, front end, back end, and to somewhat I have an element of like design in my background as well, so I understand look,
Hmm.
etc. And for people like me, this is the most exciting time because you're connecting the back end technology with the front end experience for users. And
Hmm.
there's a great many people out there that are like that who typically couldn't have been able to build before, who
Yeah.
now can. And I think there's just a lot of people who've got skill sets, knowledge that they've never managed to unlock. And
Hmm.
I think about like my wife or a lot of mums, for example. They're at home and they've got knowledge that they could leverage. Maybe they've stopped their career for a period.
Hmm.
Now's the time. Like actually, all of a sudden, you can take that knowledge and build something with it.
Yeah.
And I think that again is like really exciting. So yeah, that's where my kind of thoughts are at the moment on the next kind of 5 to 10 years and what's
Yeah.
kind of exciting and interesting.
I agree with you. That is exciting. Sometimes you ask and you don't get exciting answers, but that was very exciting, actually. Part of what I do on the back end of this podcast is experiments on my own. And I think I might take that on as an experiment. Someone who doesn't know how to code. I've worked with developers throughout my career, right? So I kind of know kind of what they're doing, maybe enough to be dangerous. So we'll see. Maybe it's a flop, but it certainly would at least send me into a flow state, I think.
It will definitely send you into flow state. I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
engineers, they go into flow state. You can't break them out for a long, long time because they're working
Yeah.
and building. And it will definitely do
Yeah.
that. And it'll also just give you that sense of accomplishment of I've built something. And,
Hmm.
there's a number of products out there. I use an app called Lovable, and
Oh,
that's
yes.
a brilliant product for building apps on. And if you combine Lovable with Known, you've got the business side of it, you've got the brand side of
Hmm.
it, you've got the app side of it, you've got the ultimate kind of tech stack to
Yeah.
release and launch a business. And yeah, I think it's a great thing for anybody to do to go, do you know what? Actually, there's a problem that
Hmm.
I'd like to play with and build something for. And it might
Yeah.
just be for you, but like maybe you've built an app in, a couple
Yeah.
of days and it actually solves a problem for you. And maybe you know some people who it solves a problem for them too. Because there's a high chance if it solves a problem for you, somebody else is out there,
That's
just like
true.
with me, who has
Hmm.
exactly the same problem. And you only need to find that community and you've built something. But if anything,
Yeah.
it will just teach people about like where technology is going, I think.
Yeah. Love that. That's fantastic. um, and you mentioned that you are in Portugal now. Do you find that the country approaches burnout differently? I know you were saying the US was different than being in England. What about Portugal?
Yeah, I think, well, if I talk about what burnout is, I think if you were to define burnout to me, burnout is almost like overworking yourself, being too focused on singular things. With
Hmm.
those three key parts of your business, you've probably let your life. So that with that three key parts of your life, you've let a
Hmm.
couple of them go, and you're focused solely on one thing, and you're overdoing it, and you're overcooking it. If I was to say what burnout is, it's probably that. And obviously, your
Hmm.
mental health runs across all three of those. And I would say if I look at England and the UK in particular, there's a pretty solid like work ethic, but the
Hmm.
work life balance is still pretty decent. People
Hmm.
weekends are respected for the most part. There's obviously industries where they're not as much, but like
Yeah.
people strive for a good work-life balance. I think that the issue in the UK is that discussion around mental health, to be transparent, is not great. And I think that's a key part of burnout, is being able to talk to people and openly acknowledge it and manage it. And it's not like that culturally. Whereas when I moved to the US, the New York hustle is real. It's like, there is nothing more real than the New York hustle. People work relentlessly. But at the same time, they recognize that like they need to get up and do yoga, or, the number of times I would do like a 12-hour day, but I've actually gone for a surf at 5 a.m. and I've got up in Brooklyn and I've got in a car, driven and gone for a surf and got back by 8 and then gone to the office and then till 9. Like that was just not, and then I'd go out for a few beers in the evening and then I'd start and do it again. And that's like the New York way. And the New York way is really nice, but people are great, much better at talking about their mental health and discussing it, and it's open in much more open in American culture, and very open in like New York culture. It's not America's not a homogenous place, but like for the most part people talk about it a bit better, and in New York in particular they do. Europe, I think you've got people are much more focused on the family life balance. And there's lots of positives that go with that. I think, people are focused on family time. They are focused on enjoying life. And, Europe has a lot to offer. That hustle isn't quite there. And to be honest, a lot of that hustle is there because there's social safety nets in Europe. Don't exist in New York.
Fair.
Like you come to New York, you've got a hustle, because if you lose your job, you could lose your job today and you'd be gone by the evening from the office. And then your healthcare would be gone in however long. And there is a hustle there, right? That does not exist in Europe. And as a result, like, that part of it, and it's not all about that, but that is an element of it, makes people be more understanding and I think avoiding burnout, because they value some of those other things, and they've got the ability to value those other things and use their time to those other things to like reduce that burnout. Now, obviously people do burn out in Europe, but I would suspect if you look to the numbers, and I don't have this, but I would suspect it's probably a lower rate than the US in particular.
That's something I'll dive into. Yeah, it's always interesting to know culturally how it's dealt with, right? Or if it is at all, right? Like you were saying with just talking about it. That's something I think I'd like to do, is kind of explore region by region what the impacts are, what are the conversations happening. So you've given me a laundry list to do, really.
If you talk to a lot of European founders, they'll tell you that, one of the issues with Europe is that people don't work with that same hustle that you get in New York. And, you're not going to get that same experience from a lot of people. And, there's many tech companies here who obviously they're focused with that same hustle. And I think, but, there's reasons behind that, what people value, what, the lifestyle they have and everything else is it means that they don't have that. And it's just also there's just something about New York and LA it gives you like legit hustle. I think one of the best positions to be in is to have the New York hustle, then move to Europe, and then you get the nice a bit of a better work-life balance, but you still work relentlessly, and it just helps you avoid burnout.
That's great advice. Book your tickets, everyone. Oh, that's great. So do you have any last things that you want to say to the audience before we wrap?
It's a great question. I've got to think through that. Any last? Do you know what's funny? This is the one thing that I would always say in a TV interview when I did an interview, because I did thousands of interviews in my time, was to finish with any last things, which a lot of people avoid, and they don't say that. They kind of finish, but you'll often get a good nugget of information in with that question. So it's a good question. I think I've just learned a lot of, one of the things I learned is that burnout is about addiction. Like, I'm going to be honest, it's about addiction and what you're addicted to. And most people don't acknowledge that. And I had to acknowledge it with journalism, because I was addicted to foreign news and news in particular. And everybody I know, I'm still friends with a lot of the world's best journalists. And, many of them done it for much longer than I did, and they're world class at what they do. Everyone's addicted to that industry in particular. And then, I moved from that, and I moved into like innovation space, and I got addicted to, again, the adrenaline rush of doing it. And then I moved to the agency
Hmm.
world, and there's a
Yeah.
great adrenaline rush with like winning pitches, and the churn that comes with it with an agency. You're constantly going, all the time,
Hmm.
and it's addictive, and it's an addictive experience, and the environment's addictive. It's addictive for different reasons.
Hmm.
And I think the biggest challenge with managing burnout, and for me, managing burnout, is like managing that addiction and
Yeah.
recognizing that actually this is an addiction that I'm addicted to. And
Yeah.
even now, I'm addicted to building. I want to build, and that
Yeah.
gives me that hit that I need. Um,
Hmm.
and I think a lot of people are not open about that. And I think as soon
Hmm.
as you are, it helps you reset and go, okay, well, actually, maybe that is something I need to manage. Because as soon as you recognize
Yeah.
that it's actually an addiction, that you're actually addicted to burnout, you almost want to burn out. It's almost
Yeah.
like you're actually like into this. And there's reasons behind that. There's probably there might be a whole host of reasons in your backstory and who you are as a person and what
Hmm.
you've done. And obviously
Yeah.
that's clearly probably the case for me. But you're you're addicted to that. But until you acknowledge it, you can't actually manage
Hmm.
it. And I actually
Yes.
came out of journalism, and it was such a stark landing because I went from, you know,
Mm.
the Arab Spring, and then I moved to the US, and I was in an office all of a sudden in Midtown in the
Mm.
Rockefeller. And I'd never done that before. I was used to like 24-hour news environment or being in the field.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I was like desperate for that hit again. And
Mm.
I realized that like I had to manage it and do other things that would, then I started
Hmm.
surfing a lot more and climbing a lot more and just getting
Yeah.
level set. And I think the biggest danger now that I look at it with my kids, and because the hardest thing for me building a startup with two young kids is that if you're not careful, you end up neglecting the family around
Hmm.
you because you're addicted to that
Yeah.
work and burn and doing it.
Hmm.
And there's many positives to having that trait. People have built incredible things because they're into that.
Hmm.
But I think one of the things I've learned is that, my wife and I talk about this a lot, is like, you need to recognize when maybe you've been working too many hours, and maybe
Yeah.
like take a day where you leave your phone somewhere and you don't answer the Slack messages, or, you take
Hmm.
a day in every 2 weeks where you have some downtime with the family to actually spend a lot of time just resetting.
Hmm.
And you can only do that if you've acknowledged that potentially you have a problem. If it was drink or drugs,
Yeah.
someone would be saying the same. They'd be saying, acknowledge it.
Yeah.
You're addicted to this. But if it's
Absolutely.
just burnout, nobody brings it up. They're like, oh, that guy's a hard worker. They might say workaholic,
Yeah.
and it's kind of jokingly said, oh, he's a workaholic. But like,
Hmm.
actually, like, you're addicted to what you're doing. You're into it. And I'll acknowledge that I am. I always want to push things, do something new.
Yeah.
And I think just openly being open and honest with yourself, and then saying, what do you do to manage it? And how do you look after your own mental health and those around you? I do breathwork sessions now in the evenings, and obviously try and surf as
Mm.
much as I can. But just anything I can do, or even just taking the kids for a walk with the dog, because, sometimes
Yeah.
12 hours goes by and I've not left the house and it's blue sky outside, but it's because I'm working.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
It's like, and I think just being honest with yourself about those things, and working a regime that helps you get out of that scenario is probably one of the best things you can do.
I love the way you articulated that because I don't think I've heard someone else say it that way, but I went through that in my head. I just, over the years, kind of saw myself, oh, well, I'm a workaholic. And I was like, there's something deeper, right? Like, why do I want to work so hard all the time and like jump into different areas? And it's because, to use your word addicted, I need to be learning something new, right? Drastically new, not just like something adjacent. And I need that. I crave that. So now I'm trying to manage it in a healthy way and not just have that label of, oh, I'm a workaholic and that's
Yeah.
just an okay thing to be, especially as my kids get older and, I want them to I want to model something healthy for them, and we'll see how that turns out, but I'm trying. Oh, you've had such great points. I'm so glad that you came on the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the time.
Yeah. So, if someone wants to look into Known, how do they find you or the company?
Yeah, they can go on getnoan.com, which is getnoan.com, and sign up and try it. Or they can find me on LinkedIn. It's Neal Mann, Nealmann, and they can find me there. Ping me a message, and happy to chat anytime, or and take somebody through it.
Fantastic. And thank you, everyone. This has been another great episode. Remember to follow, like, and share. And we are on video now for those that don't know. So this episode will be on YouTube so you can see our faces and get all of our reactions to the conversation. So thank you, everyone. Bye.